the 70s, it was all about classroom management was the driving force. You had to be a good disciplinarian, you had to keep kids on task, teach to the middle. That was the philosophy back then, and the reality was that the upper end children were going to be supported by their parents and their grandparents, and the lower end children, well, there's plenty of jobs for them in the 70s, and society needed that. So we weren't college and career ready, and it was really about being an entertainer, keep kids engaged, create relationships. And to be totally candid and honest, I would tell you that I don't know that I ever felt as a teacher any academic pressure, unless a student with a very vocal parent didn't get the grade that they wanted. Felt a lot more pressure on the performance courts and the athletic fields. Most people measured schools by how well they did on Friday and Saturday nights. So a lot more pressure there. Again, I felt like I was a good teacher. I understood my content. I could tell people about content. But I don't know that I could ever say that there was mastery and learning taking place. But you walk into a classroom in Lincoln today, or anywhere, I think in America, and you definitely see the teacher is able to connect on a whole bunch of different levels. We connected on one level, and that is you either got it or you didn't get it. And today, the teacher with 22 students in a third grade classroom is connecting on 22 levels, and that's the big difference today. So there's a lot more pressure on teachers to one, produce, engage, and create those success routes for children.
When I started teaching 20 years ago, the issues that I was asked to address were academic. And when there was a child or a student who came in who needed something, I would work with the counselor and we would find a way to address the need. But typically those were things that happened outside of the classroom, and although I absolutely would respond to or find a way to help that student, I'd respond to the need or the issue, it was almost something that was outside of my teaching. It's what I did in the evenings when I called parents and families. And over the 20 years, what used to happen after school became more and more a part of what was happening when I was teaching. And I think a common misconception may be that education can fix it, but to ask that the classroom address everyone's need puts a lot on teachers.
I've always taught students in poverty. That's what Avenue Scholars was. Those are the students I taught at South High. And poverty affects the brain in very specific ways. Poverty is trauma. It's actual trauma to the brain. And we know from research from Maslow's hierarchy of needs, for example, that unless your very basic needs are met, you are not able to concentrate on something more. You wouldn't be able to care about Faulkner if you are spending the day wondering where your next meal is coming from. I used to keep apples and granola bars in my desk drawer to give students who I knew were coming to school hungry, and that was just a Band-Aid. It wasn't something that would solve the issue of going home to an empty fridge and maybe the lights not being on, and where are they going to do their homework if there isn't electricity, and if they have to take care of siblings, and if they have to work 40 hours a week to support their families, and if they have to go and interpret for their families when they go to doctor's appointments. These are things teachers cannot affect at all. I can hold my students to high expectations, and I will always do that. I never allow students to say, well, I'm not capable of better. I always told my students, you're capable of better. But if they came to me in crisis, I couldn't say, well, we're gonna ignore the crisis today. We're gonna ignore the fact that you're hungry, and we're gonna ignore the fact that you're homeless, and you're going to be great at Faulkner today.
I started teaching school, 2nd grade in Ord, Nebraska. It was an open concept school, and we had a little bit of everything. I started the year with one boy who was on probation already at 2nd grade, and I was not prepared to handle a student like that. And then he also flew off the jungle gym in the 2nd week of school and had a compound fracture, and I got my first ride in an ambulance with him. So that was quite an experience I had there, but I wouldn't have traded it for the world. And then I got married and moved to Grand Island, and I taught out at a school on the eastern side of town, and it's very, Very nice school, very nice clientele, students. You know, if you'd say practice your flashcards, their parents would bend over backwards to make sure they practiced their flashcards and did everything they needed to do. Then I was shifted over to another school, which was in Middle Grand Island, and that's where I learned to teach. That was a low-income school. I began to learn about children who didn't have parents that came home and tucked them in at bed at night or checked to see if their homework was done. And I had a principal there that said, when you teach here, one thing you have to remember is that you could be the best thing that happens to a child in their day. And when you sit there and think, oh my, I could be the best thing that happens to them in a day. I work with children who need to be loved, who need to be respected, who need to just know that they matter here. And that's what I love. I love teaching.
Well, they often talk about how the school environment is very much a microcosm of our society, and I think you do really see that reflected in the classrooms. There's much more diversity. There's been changes in family structure, the role that community plays in the ability for students to be successful has transitioned, and so all of those things, the way society has changed, has really impacted the way we need to focus on teacher preparation. And that's one of the reasons that we have them so engaged in schools very early. Each school has its own unique culture, its own unique personality. Some of that's driven by leadership. Much of that is driven by the community. So the ability to adapt to those changes in our society are an important part of teacher preparation. Probably one of the biggest changes that I've seen in my 30-plus years in education.
Teacher preparation really is about, one, developing that fire, that passion that you have to be successful. If you look at teaching as a job, you won't be successful. It has to be a mission. Teachers are never going to be highly paid. We're not going to be paid in comparable to the people that we're producing, the doctors, the dentists, the lawyers, the folks that are going off and doing the startups and technology. But the reality of it is, it's the profession that makes all professions possible. So one is that, light that fire, get that engagement. Secondly, we have to have some content knowledge, and then methodology. We have to have that methodology. So we've got the content, we've got the passion. How do you produce then the lessons that lead to successful academics? And then, fourth is just that relationship piece. How do you build relationships with kids that are way, way, way different than anything that we've ever experienced in our lives? And I think if there are some shortcomings in higher education, and this is not meant as a criticism, it's a reality, it's that there's so much that's required for successful teaching today that they can't give us polished diamonds. And I know some of my colleagues, I've been in those conversations, say, give us better people, give us better teachers. I'm convinced now we have to take the rough diamond, the kid that has those four things that I just talked about, and we polish them up and we turn them into gemstones.
And when we're thinking about teacher preparation is the first step of a teacher's career. And so what happens in teacher prep, you're with us for 2.5 years, but in that 2.5 years, 700 hours of faculty members working with you, classroom teachers working with you, an instructional coach. It's a long journey just in those couple of years. But when you leave us, you're 21 or 22, that's when the journey starts. That's when you think about what's the role of a college of education, or what's the role of a district in partnering to make sure teachers are well mentored into the profession. It's not as much about teacher preparation as it is about what happens after they leave us, because that 21-year-old is pretty vulnerable himself or herself.
My background, the life that I've led, has really influenced the kind of kids I wanted to work with. I didn't really have a cookie cutter life, and I know that a lot of kids don't, and so I really wanted to be able to reach out and use my own experiences to help kids get through their experiences. Working in the Omaha Public School District, I see the kids that I want to teach. I see the kid that I was, and so that means a lot to me that I can reach out. And a lot of times people have this idea that they're going to go and teach disadvantaged kids and they're just going to fix their lives and they're going to the save the world complex. And I don't think that I've ever taken it as I'm gonna fix something, because I don't think it's broken. I think that the kids just need a little extra support, a little more structure, and I like being the person that provides that for them.
teaching students in a highly diverse community, students that may have a greater need, does require a commitment and a skill set that not everybody that goes into teaching has the desire to do or possesses a skill set for doing that. So it does take a certain gift, a certain passion for meeting the needs of those students. It takes a tremendous amount of energy. And so our program is really designed to help students self-reflect, self-assess, to know whether or not they do have what it takes and have the strong desire to work in schools where there is a tremendous amount of need.
I came out of college and thought that all my students would be the same, that they would all come to class prepared to learn, and they would all be fed, and they would all be at the same reading level, and they would have all their needs met so that we could just learn as a class. And I found out that that wasn't true. And so I would have classes where I had 25 to 30 students at maybe 15 different levels. Some of them hadn't had anything to eat, some of them had seen horrible things at home or in their neighborhoods. Some suffered from PTSD, some of them had behavioral disorders, just so many different challenges that came to the classroom that it got a little bit overwhelming, because I wanted to be able to reach every student. I've seen a lot of teachers and it's understandable just to say, okay, well, I can't reach all of them, I'll just reach the ones who want to be here and are ready to be here. To me, that's not acceptable. I teach every student, and it's my responsibility to teach every student as though they were my own child. If my child was in a classroom and had a need and the teacher didn't meet it, I'd be very upset. And so I had some students who didn't have parents to advocate for them, or whose parents didn't know that they could advocate for them. Maybe the school system was foreign to them, or they didn't understand how to do that.
It's almost like learning a new language, though, where you can read about it and you can practice it and you can study it, but until you're immersed in the language, until you're immersed in the classroom, you have no idea what is going on. And I almost wish that there would have been more practicums that were based solely in behavior management, because I walked in, the first day thinking, it's gonna work, the kids are gonna love me, they're all gonna listen, and I had, we had specials right away the first day, and it just, everything was horrible. And I remember going in during plan time to one of my team members and just crying and being like, what did I get myself into? And she just said, you just need to go and do it.
Your first year teaching, you're just in survival mode. How do I get from day to day? How do I make sure I can wake up the next day and just get through the day? We have to get used to that rhythm for a couple of years before we're able to think about something more complicated.
The reality of the fast-paced life in an elementary school building hits that brand new teacher. It is overwhelming. And there's nothing that can set up a teacher, or there's really no experience that a brand new teacher can have that makes them feel like what a school day feels like.
A teacher will teach, on average, maybe 10 lessons a day. They have their whole group instruction. And then they might have 4 or 5 guided reading groups, so small groups of students. Well, each one of those groups may or may not be a very different lesson depending on the need of the students. And then you teach whole group math, and then there's small groups in math. So again, that might be 3 or 4 different mini lessons. And then science and social studies. So a minimum of 10 lessons a day that a teacher has prepared for.
The research has been done, and I don't know the actual number, but there are thousands of decisions that are being made every day. And there are hundreds of needs that your class of 20 or 25 kids are always showering upon you.
You have to be a social worker, you have to be a nurse, you have to be their surrogate parent. You're there with them 8 hours of the day, you're there with them for more time sometimes than their family members are with them. I mean, it comes down to even guiding them to making good choices, character education that goes above and beyond just it being nice. It's more about learning persistence, learning stick-to-itiveness, learning how to be brave enough to step out of what their comfort zone is and to challenge them to try.
As teachers, we have to be on every day. We owe it to our students to be on our game the best that we can every single day.
I think we all go into the profession a little dreamy-eyed, and then you see it, and sometimes that scares people away, but for me, I like the challenge, and I'm excited to have those students that are going to push me.
Once they get here, in any building, and once they start to experience it, and with a support system in place, they can make it. They can do it.
As an educator, I feel like you're always learning, so professional development is very important in that in order to be reflective and keep up on what's going on with education, you have to continuously be adding things to your educator's tool belt. And so just knowing where to look for it and knowing it's out there and never thinking you're good enough that you don't need it.
Professional development can mean many different things. Professional development can be a one-on-one activity with one teacher, and that would be looking at us being the mentor teacher to help someone with some aspect of literacy that they're struggling with. It can also be a staff development where we are presenting to the entire staff. It could be a district-wide curriculum day where we are presenting some sort of aspect of literacy and reading. It could be something as simple as saying, I'm really interested in talking about poverty in the classroom, and we could do a book study with a group of teachers who are involved or want to be involved in that process.
I think parents know professional development when they open up the school calendar and they know their youngsters at home because it says teacher in service. So what our parents are probably wondering is, what happens during teacher in service days?
It's a time for teachers to collaborate and learn from each other, and it's embedded in everything that we do, and we are totally committed to it, and it's a big reason why we have the kind of success that we have.
Teachers come early, they go to a faculty workshop, they start first thing in the morning. Teachers are getting trained on what their students need for them to teach differently. So that's happening, but you also have to give teachers time to process the content and work collaboratively. So they get all the input on here's the best practice, here's why it works, but then they have some time during that day to work with peer teachers, same grade level or same content area, and actually look at samples of student work.
Can someone help me make sense of this? Or I tried this and it worked with these 3 kids, but it's not working with these kids. So how can I help figure out how to make these kids as successful as the other kids?
And then following that teacher in service, they talk about expectations, frequency with which they'll come back and progress monitor student work so that then they can see 6 weeks from now, here's what we got in the training, here's how it impacted student learning, and what difference did that make?
Again, this is an evolution that we never had back in the day. There were no coaches in the 70s and the 80s. You know, it was the principal who came in with a pad, and for one 30-minute lesson, if you didn't excite them, you didn't get a good evaluation. Today, it's really about delivering a math lesson with an instructional coach, a math teacher professional that is in the classroom side by side with the teacher, but then critiquing their lesson and really having that in-depth conversation without fear of it becoming part of an evaluation.
When I arrived at Elliott and knew I was walking into a school that had 3 coaches, 2 academic, 1 behavior, I thought, finally, I'm coming into a school that has what it needs to support teachers, because as a principal, I have often felt that there should be a managerial principal and an instructional principal in every building, just to be able to meet all of the needs. We've got experienced, skilled teachers in the role of coaches that can provide that instructional support for teachers so that their instruction can really improve.
So if I help one kid figure out a behavior and learn how to calm down when they're too upset, I've helped one kid learn how to calm down when they're upset, and that's great. But if I help a teacher learn how to do that so she can help kids or he can help kids learn how to calm down when they're upset, then I've impacted 25 kids. And if I can impact a building full of teachers, there's 400 kids that I could touch, and that's really satisfying.
I was really fortunate at Belmont. We had a really strong instructional coach. What I appreciated about her was her constant and immediate feedback that she would give me. She was never worried about how I might feel about maybe some constructive criticism. So she would come in and it was just a nice extra set of eyes to help support me become better. And so we met at least 2 or 3 times a month, and we would co-plan lessons together. She would come in and teach with me. We were always in a reflective conversation about what did we do well, where can we grow, and what's our next step. And so that's sort of what I've taken, my experience, and tried to do as a coach here at Elliott.
I can honestly say that the teaching that's happening here at Elliott is of the highest caliber. The instructional standards that are in place here and the level of conversation that the teachers have with each other to collaborate on which instructional strategies to use for the kids that are proficient, which instructional strategies to use for kids that are close but not quite proficient, and then for kids that are so far from proficient, we've got to do something totally different. We're in education today, we are at a level in this game that I've never seen before.
I think from a testing standpoint, the pendulum has swung too far. And we are spending a lot more time testing and making sure that our curriculum is aligned to what's being assessed. But I do have a pretty good historical understanding of why that came about, because I think for a lot of years, when I started in the 70s and prior to that and probably up until the early 90s, it was really about open school and go teach, and there wasn't any accountability. So we didn't know from one school to the next school what kids were learning. And again, parents that were supportive, that provided access to libraries and field trips and summer vacations, those children did very well. They went off to good colleges, they got good scholarships, and we called it good back then. And today we don't call it good.
Some of the rules with No Child Left Behind, or some of the indicators, would be that children had to make adequate yearly progress. People figure that, just like any factory, they want to put out the best product they can put out. But the fallacy behind No Child Left Behind is we aren't using the same materials to create the end product. All of our kids come to us with different abilities, with different backgrounds. How do we all end up on the same page at the end of the year? And that was the most frustrating point for teachers to get used to.
I think we started out as any other school. You're faced with this data that comes in and it says it's terrible, your kids aren't going to make 50%, the 50% mark, and that's what No Child Left Behind or whatever rule it is says you have to be at. Well, you can sit back and say, well, it's because of poverty. How are we supposed to teach kids who don't even speak the same language as we do at school and at home and wherever? Well, our principal said, we got to stop making excuses and start moving forward and doing what we can do.
I think there are a number of things that have contributed to our success and to the fact that we have been able to meet each of the expectations for the past probably 5-6 years as far as state recommendations and AYP. And I think part of the reason why we're able to do that is because we've always looked at what is the next level? Where do we need to go for the next piece so we can qualify so that we are accepted as an AYP school?
There was almost like a life-changing event that happened here at Wasmer. We had a phenomenal facilitator come and work with us as a staff, and his name is Marty Fetch. And he came in and spoke to us about culture and community.
And it's kind of interesting because when you develop this culture and community and responsibility to each other, you can just build on one year after the next. Previous to Marty coming, we didn't do that. And the staff probably wouldn't have thought about things in that light. But now they want to make sure that we keep moving in that direction, that the kids understand they're part of the culture of the whole building, and that each one of them has a duty to perform, so to speak.
You set the expectations for them, and you show them, help them to set their own goals. And they go, oh, I made it. And they're celebrating that. And it's it just builds that team, it builds the respect, they become your family. And so we've pulled the kids in, and we're trying to find ways to pull more parents in because they're a missing piece that needs to be part of that. But the kids need to feel that this is their family too.
When we develop a culture within our building, the kids feel a fairness. They feel like they are looked upon as a person in themselves. It takes away that anxiety that sometimes comes in the door with them as extra baggage from their home environment, and lets them learn, frees their mind to know that they don't, if they have issues, we can talk about them and set them aside for a while and still move on to learning. And so that's what helps our scores increase.
Lincoln's changing demographically. We have 400 homeless kids today. We have 60 kids incarcerated. You know, we have 43% of our children are free and reduced. You know, it saddens me when I drive by the People City Mission in the morning and you see the young families that are standing in line. How do we get them the resources where they can be successful and realize that education is that step, that climb out of poverty? That's going to be the challenge going forward, and that's going to be our legacy. I mean, truly, in America, we ought not to be arguing about what does it cost. We ought to be arguing about what more do we need so that there isn't any more poverty, so that all students have an education and an opportunity to fulfill and realize their dreams in terms of what they're good at, and that we have to be the catalyst for that. And there's a cost to that. And it pains me every year that we have to argue about state aid and state funding and contracts and salaries. And the reality of it is, you know, when you think about the profession that makes all professions possible, what is the value of a great teacher? What is that worth to a society? And then what do we need to do to get all of our teachers up to that great category?